Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail. Today we are going to share werewolf encounter horror stories. First story, The Wolf at Skinwalker Ranch. My wife and I were sitting on the front porch after a long day of moving furniture and boxes into our new house. We were tired, red-faced, and sweating after sharing the burden between the two of us. The sun was setting on the horizon as we sipped our warm beers and looked out over the landscape of our newly acquired ranch. Fields stretched off into the distance as far as the eye could see, not a neighbor in sight for miles. The cows were grazing, looking unhappy, their tails hanging straight down as they ignored the fresh grass all around them. I figured they were just upset from the long move. "Why do you think they needed so many locks?" my wife asked, taking a sip of her beer. It was the elephant in the room, so to speak, and I had to admit I was curious about it as well. Every door in the house had a deadbolt on it, inside and out. Not only that, but the windows were shielded by thick iron bars. The old owners had left long before we could ask them about it. The folks who lived here before were probably paranoid about home invasions so far from the city. "We'll take them down, and I'll fill the screw holes with wood putty. We'll paint them over, and they'll be good as new. You wanted to redo the trim anyway. And the bars on the windows? That'll take a bit more work, but I can get it done before the weekend. I'll just have to run over to the hardware store to grab a few things. I can't find some of my tools. Maybe they got lost during the move." My wife was no longer paying attention. She was staring at some point far off in the distance. "What's that?" she asked, pointing. I followed her finger and looked to see a large gray wolf moving in the fields. It seemed to be stalking deliberately toward us, marching at a steady, quick pace. It came to a fence and did the strangest thing. Instead of leaping over it or burrowing under it, as I'd expected, it stood up on two legs like a person, grasped the loose corner of the wire fencing, and pulled it up, ducking between the strands and stepping through, one leg after the other. It was exactly how I would have done it. Once it was on the other side, it went back on four legs and started its progress toward us again. Then it looked up and saw us staring at it. The gray wolf stayed still for a few seconds, then disappeared in the tall grass suddenly. It was just gone. It didn't dive into the grass or duck down. It was there, and then a moment later it was just gone, vanished in the blink of an eye. The two of us sat uneasily on the porch, and I stood up to look in the distance, trying to spot the creature. But it was nowhere to be found. "I'm going inside. You should come too," my wife said, sounding nervous. We went in and locked the doors at the front and back of the house. The bars stayed on the windows after that, and my wife didn't mention the deadbolts on the doors in the house again either. The two of us went to bed that night with little talk between us, a big difference from the ecstatic chatter that had been the norm all day prior to the event with the wolf, or whatever that thing was. I got the feeling wolf was not quite the right word. That night, something else even more disturbing happened to us both. I woke up in the early hours of the morning, around 3:30 a.m. according to the bedside alarm clock. When I looked next to me in the bed and saw my wife's spot was empty, I became immediately concerned for her safety. Where could she have gone at this time of night? I wondered. That was when I heard her voice calling to me from outside the window, asking insistently for me to let her in. Her cries for help were muffled through the glass, and I lifted the heavy old window pane up to hear her better. "What are you doing out there?" I asked, worried about the wolf we'd seen earlier. I was looking around for glowing eyes reflecting the moonlight nearby. Standing on two legs or four, I wasn't sure which to expect. "I must have been sleepwalking," she said dreamily. "The front door locked behind me somehow. You have to let me back in. Please. It's cold out here." "I'll be right down," I said, without thinking about how impossible all of that was. I was only concerned for her safety at that moment, and she had been known to sleepwalk occasionally, so that part seemed to make sense. I raced down the stairs in my boxers and grasped the front door knob in my hand, turning it. Thankfully, it was locked, or who knows what might have happened. Reaching up to turn the lock, I was startled to hear a voice behind me. "What are you doing?" my wife asked. I jumped at the sound, my heartbeat quickening. But what terrified me even more was what I had just seen outside. Given the time frame it had taken me to get downstairs, it was impossible that it had been her. It was like someone else had been out there, wearing her skin and speaking in her voice. Looking at the woman standing in front of me, I had no doubt it was Christine, my wife. Panting, I walked over to her and hugged her tightly. "What's wrong?" she asked. I didn't answer, afraid she would think I was losing my mind. Some things we don't share with anyone, not even our significant others. We take them to our grave, afraid that if we speak of them out loud, it will make them true, and it will make the source of the impossible things return. So instead, I just took her hand and led her up the stairs, looking back nervously over my shoulder at the front door, waiting for the sound of a key turning in the lock, or the sound of it being broken down by powerful forces beyond my control. Instead, there was a gentle knock, polite almost at first, but then the fist began to pound against the front door of the house louder and louder, more and more insistently. My wife stopped, turning around to look at me on the stairs. "Who could that be at this time of night?" she asked. "Just ignore it. Let's go to bed. They'll go away, eventually." After a few moments of hesitation, she turned around and began going up the stairs once more, taking a couple nervous looks back as she did. We kept walking up the stairs as the pounding continued, devolving into steady scratching noises that didn't cease until daybreak. "What were you doing down in the basement last night?" my wife asked at the breakfast table the next morning. Neither one of us mentioned the sounds at the door the night before. We were both trying to act like it had never happened. In the light of the morning, it seemed like a shared hallucination. A bad dream brought on by warm beer and too much time spent moving boxes without enough assistance. "In the basement?" "I wasn't in the basement," I told her. "Yeah, you were. You were calling my name, asking me to come down there." I looked at her with concern. "When was this?" "Right before I found you at the front door. I figured I just missed you, that you found whatever you were looking for down in the basement and went into the kitchen for a snack or something. But then I found you by the front door. I was never in the basement last night." She looked at me, puzzled. "Of course you were. Who else would have been calling for me from down there?" I debated telling her what I had seen outside and decided I probably should. We were clearly dealing with something very strange here, and we needed to be on the same team if we were going to figure it out. "Christine, did you go outside at all last night?" "No." "What does that have to do with Dash?" "Okay, so here's the thing. I saw you outside, at the same time when you were going down to the basement. You were calling to me from out front, saying you had been sleepwalking and you were locked out. That's why I was at the door. I never went down to the basement, and I don't think that was really you outside either. I think there's something else causing all this to happen." "What the hell could cause that to happen?" I opened my mouth to answer when there was a polite rapping at the door. The two of us sat dead silent for a few moments, unsure what to do. The knocking came again, and I heard a man's voice, muffled through the door, saying, "There's a car here. Maybe they're out in the fields. Should we just leave it on the doorstep?" A woman's voice asked. "I don't like being here any more than you do, but that seems a bit rude. Maybe we should come back." Christine and I both stood up, sensing that this was not the same entity from the night before. I don't know how I could tell, but I just could. This wasn't an evil presence. It was just some neighbors coming by to welcome us. And they sounded like they might know something more than we did about the ranch and its mysteries. I opened the front door and saw a man and woman with their backs turned, walking away from us. They spun around when they heard the sound of us opening up. "Oh, hi there. We're the Turnbulls. We live down the road. Technically next door, as if there is such a thing out here. But we do share an easement with you to access the river. Jack takes the cattle down that way sometimes for a change of scenery. The man put his arm around his wife's shoulder and whispered something in her ear. She abruptly stopped talking, realizing that she was rambling on nervously. Sharon, I'm sure they don't want to get into all that. We just wanted to stop by and welcome you to the neighborhood, so to speak. It's nice to have another couple living next door again. This place has been empty for so long. My wife and I looked at each other with surprise. As far as we knew, the place had been occupied right up until our arrival. It hadn't shown signs of disrepair or neglect, so we'd had no reason to think otherwise. Really? No wonder the place was such a bargain. How long was it empty for? The man and woman shared a look. Oh, not that long. A few years. Anyways, we just wanted to bring this casserole. We have a few errands to run, but it was great meeting you both. Come on by our place anytime. We're number 56981. The next driveway on your side, up that way, the man said, hooking his thumb eastward. I had never seen anyone introduce themselves and run so quickly. I try not to take it personally. It was so nice to meet you both, the woman said, taking a few quick steps towards my wife and handing her the casserole dish. You can keep that dish, by the way. It's Pyrex. Great for casseroles. She backed up to join her husband, looking around the property nervously as she did. Hey, can I ask you something? The two of them looked ready to run back to their car, but they stopped and nodded, shifting on their feet anxiously and waiting for me to speak. Have you ever seen anything? How should I put this? There's been a couple weird occurrences since we moved in, and I was just wondering if you could tell us anything. Is this place haunted? Is that why it was so cheap? I can tell you guys are nervous. Just give us something to work with. Please. We're getting a little freaked out. The woman looked pleadingly at her husband. He nodded to her, and she went back to the car and got in the passenger seat where she sat, darting her eyes around from side to side. What exactly did you see? The man asked. Wait, no. Don't tell me. It's better if we don't speak of them. They know when you talk about them. It's better if we don't. Well then, how do we get rid of them? You don't. These things have been around a lot longer than you or me. My wife and I get our share of strange events on the ranch next door too, but not as bad as here. This place, well, there's something here that makes it special. And not in a good way, I'm sorry to say. I'd tell you more, but it would only make things worse. It always does. There was a sound of knuckles rapping against the glass, and I looked to see his wife banging on the car window, looking with wide eyes at us and pointing into the distance, towards the fields. My eyes followed where she was pointing, and I looked to see the large gray wolf was back, and it was moving towards us again. I told you, we're not meant to speak of them. I need to go. The two of you should decide soon if you want to stay. This place will change you, and it will take things from you. You only get so long to decide. If you wait to see what the changes will be, it will already be too late. Trust me. With that, he turned away and went back to his car. He started the engine and drove off much quicker than I would have thought safe on the dirt driveway, swerving and leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the air around us, obstructing my view for a few seconds. When I turned around again, the wolf was much, much closer. It was about 50 yards away and closing in fast. It was looking at me intently. My wife was running back towards the house, yelling at me to come, but I was frozen, watching the wolf as it stood on its hind legs again. Not a wolf. Stop calling it a wolf. It's not a wolf. It's just trying to fool you into thinking that's what it is. But it's so much more dangerous than that. I tried to take a step, but my legs wouldn't budge. My eyes were locked on the wolf as it began to stalk towards me. No longer an animal, but something else wearing an animal suit. The ancient leathery-skinned humanoid beneath the wolf armor could be glimpsed occasionally as it strode like a hunter in my direction, taking long steps, moving low to the ground. The fur pieces were simply strapped onto it like clothing, the wolf head strapped on like a hat. What are you doing? Get in here, my wife yelled one more time, and my foot suddenly started to move. As soon as it did, I found I was unfrozen and finally able to start running, and not a second too soon. The house was close, but the thing was fast. When it saw me beginning to run, it became a wolf again in an instant. The idea that it was anything, but that seemed ludicrous as I watched it race towards me on all fours, its snapping jaws dripping saliva as it dove to cut me off. This thing was a massive gray wolf through and through. It could be nothing but that. and yet my eyes had begged otherwise just a moment before. If not for my wife, it might have gotten me. But she saw what was happening and took a large rock we had been using as a doorstop and threw it straight at the thing's head. It missed, hitting the beast in the shoulder instead, but it was enough to drive it back for a brief second, which was all I needed. I ran into the house and slammed the door shut behind me. An instant later, the scratching began again. Soon there was another one at the back door, scratching it as well. The sounds continued for hours. When the noises stopped, and I finally ventured outside again, I found that 3 of the cattle had been killed. The others were scared out of their wits, hiding huddled together in a corner of the field near to the house. Their eyes darted around the fields, reminding me of how the neighbors had looked as they scanned our property for the things lurking in the shadows. I was beginning to suspect we were not going to be able to stay in this place much longer. Even if we could survive, this was no way to live. That night, my wife and I sat in the living room with all the blinds and curtains drawn, discussing what we would do. The house wouldn't sell quickly. That much was obvious based on the neighbors' statements. The 2 of us decided we would leave in the morning, regardless. We would stay in a motel until we found an apartment to rent, sacrificing all of our investment in the house. Even if we put it up for sale again, it would be a long time before we made any portion of our money back. But it was too dangerous and too terrifying to stay. "I'm going to bed," my wife said, looking tired. "Come upstairs soon, okay? I don't want to be alone." "I'll be up in a minute," I told her. "I just want to grab a glass of water." She nodded sleepily and went up the stairs slowly, looking depressed. We had dreamed about this move for so long, and now it was all coming to ruins. I felt sad about it too. I went into the kitchen and poured a glass of water. After drinking it down in one long gulp, I decided I needed another. It had been a long day, and I'd been too distracted to drink anything. A noise came from upstairs, a scraping sound like claws. Setting down the glass, I turned around and listened closely. "Christine?" She didn't reply. I took a few steps across the linoleum floor of the kitchen before calling out again. Once again, there was no answer. By the time I got to the bottom of the stairs, my heart was pounding so fast and hard I felt like it would beat right out of my chest. I opened my mouth to call her name one more time when I saw it. The wolf that wasn't a wolf strode on 2 legs across the gap at the top of the stairs, then disappeared around the corner, heading towards my wife. It was so quick that I thought for a moment I could have imagined it. Just a gray blur that was gone in an instant. If not for the fact that it looked down the stairs at me and smiled, its long canines gleaming in the light. Its eyes were pure blackness. I ran up the stairs as fast as I could, terrified of what it would do to her. When I got to the 2nd floor, I looked down the hall to see all of the doors were closed. It was as if the whole thing had really been just my imagination. Taking an unsteady step towards the bedroom, my heartbeat did not slow down even slightly. My hand was shaking as I reached for the doorknob, turning it and entering the master bedroom. I entered hesitantly, finding the room dark and my wife asleep in bed. Part of me wanted to wake her up, but for some reason I didn't. "It will be fine, just go to bed," my irrational thoughts said. My pounding heart began to slow and my eyelids grew heavy. "This is fine," my mind told me. "Everything is fine. Just go to sleep now." Trying not to think of what I had seen just moments before, I climbed into bed, getting in next to my wife and shivering while my body warmed up beneath the sheets. There was a soft sound of padding footsteps outside the bedroom door. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Something wants to get inside the bedroom, and a strange, foreign voice in my mind is telling me to let it in. 2nd story. My grandfather had the worst job in human history. We used to have to take the corpses out with canes, he told me one time, because they were so intertwined. Entire pyramids of bodies, people climbing on top of one another, clawing each other to get away from the gas. They used to tell us it was a quick death, but everyone knew it wasn't. The screaming in the chamber would go on for 15 or 20 minutes. They used to put a little glass window in the doors so the doctors could look in and watch. My grandfather, Alexander, had told me about his time in the Sonderkommando, the corpse units of the National Socialist concentration camps. He had been arrested in Poland, simply because he had been a leader in his field and an intellectual with a history of supporting Polish nationalism. This had raised red flags, and during a roundup of the intelligentsia, my grandfather had also been arrested and tortured by the Gestapo. They had made him sign something he never got to read, and then he had been moved to the prison and, eventually, to his new job. The day it happened, he said, my friend Bartek and I were on duty. Our job was to lead the people towards the chambers without alerting them or causing a riot. The Sonderkommando all used lines like, don't forget where you put your clothes because you'll need to come back to them, or tie your shoes together for convenience to make it easier to find them when you come back. We always emphasized how they would come back after their shower. But I never looked them in the eyes when I said it. He stared out the window for a long moment at this, his mug of coffee steaming in front of him. I knew not to interrupt him. He often talked to me about his experiences. It seemed like he wanted to draw a poison out of his memories, and letting him talk seemed to help him do it. So the chamber was packed as always, he said, 800 people smashed into a tiny area, like sardines. To get the last ones in, the SS would often beat and bludgeon people. The claustrophobia must have been horrifying, the lack of air, the packed chamber like a massive coffin. By the time they slammed the door closed, there wasn't an extra inch of space into the entire chamber. In fact, after they opened the door, their bodies would often still be standing, because there was simply no room for them to fall down. Except for the middle of the chamber, of course, their people lived longest and they tried to escape from the gas. We would see infants and small children at the bottom of the human pyramid, smothered and stampeded. The stronger ones would be at the top, having climbed over the bodies of others to try to get some air at the top of the chamber. The gas did have a tendency to fall, depending on the temperature and humidity. When they opened the doors, Bartek and I walked in along with the other Sonderkommando. We used long canes to pull the bodies apart. At first, a Sonderkommando would treat the bodies with respect, but after tens of thousands of bodies, you just started throwing them like bags of potatoes. It was our job, after all. He said this with an ironic misery, his eyes misty. Bartek and I would then pile the bodies on carts to be brought to other teams of Sonderkommando. One team, which we called the dentists, would rip the gold teeth out so they could melt it down into bars and send it back to Germany. Another would shave all the remaining hair off the corpses. They had shaved them when they first got there, but any remainder would make the crematoria reek of burning hair. Bartek and I were moving our carts of corpses up the lift elevators when a commotion suddenly broke out in the nearby medical barracks. They called it a medical barracks, but in reality, it was mostly a place where doctors experimented on people and where the sick were often given lethal doses of phenol intravenously. This also wasn't a quick death, as the person would begin to get agonizing cramps and a burning sensation before devolving into unconsciousness. I had no idea what was going on. At first, I thought the SS were trying to prevent a prisoner escape, or perhaps someone had already escaped and they were in an uproar. It looked like someone had kicked a hornet's nest. I saw a government vehicle speeding in with fully armed troops. The guards surrounded the gates of the camp, a thick ring of black-suited soldiers. I saw a doctor running out of the barracks with blood covering his white lab coat. His eyes looked wild, and he screamed something in German to the soldiers. He kept screaming it over and over. Die Wolfen, he said. Most of the Sonderkommando, including myself, knew at least some German. It was, after all, the administrative language of the National Socialist State, and the Germans never deigned to speak to us in our own languages, unless they were torturing us or trying to get information. By this time, Bartek and I had paused, a cart full of emaciated, naked corpses lying in front of each of us. The doctor ran past us, not noticing us, his eyes wild. He continued to scream gibberish in German, speaking so fast I could barely understand anything except two words, the girl and the wolf. What in the hell do you think this is about? Bartek asked me, his blue eyes wide and uncertain. I just shook my head, feeling numb. I hadn't felt much of anything in months, to be honest. I had closed myself down emotionally, psychologically removed myself from the present. I saw much of this as if it were happening to someone else. It was my mind, I think, trying to protect me. Even now, looking back, I feel like I'm telling someone else's story sometimes. A torrent of gunfire erupted from the medical barracks, and then a woman ran out, a nurse. Her face looked like a mask of gore. One eye hung limply from its socket, and her entire left cheek hung down, a flap of skin revealing the teeth beyond, like some sort of grotesque half-smile. In her remaining eye, I saw mortal terror and fear. Seeing it coming from our captors loosened something inside of me. Bartek felt the same way. We left our carts of dead and turned to run. At that moment, something tore its way out of the barracks. As I saw what it was, I began running with all the energy that my starving body could provide. It was a girl, or at least it had been. She looked no older than 12 or 13, and she wore a striped uniform soaked in blood. Her arms and legs lengthened before my eyes, forming long claws that erupted from her fingers. Her mouth had formed into a strange rictus grin, with drops of blood falling from her sharpening teeth. Stringy black hair seemed to grow from her head, and her eyes turned yellow, with slitted, demonic pupils gleaming in the center, emanating a bloodlust and fury I had never seen before. The SS guards and soldiers had streamed in the front gates by this point, running at her and shouting orders. Automatic rifles began to fire, and Bartek grabbed my hand and pulled me down to the ground just in time. I heard bullets whizzing over my head, smashing into the crematoria's chimneys and the surrounding barracks. I knew they weren't shooting at me, but so many soldiers had opened fire that the entire area had turned into a shooting gallery. I looked back and saw bullets ripping into the girl's body. Gore blossomed from her chest, blood and flesh exploding out of the exit wounds, covering the bare dirt around her. With a roar, she jumped on top of the barracks, leaping 20 feet in the air. To my amazement, I watched the wounds healing before my eyes. I wondered what kind of strange medical experiment this was that could produce such an effect. Bartek shook me, telling me, "We have to run, we have to get out," but I just stayed there shell-shocked. He slapped me, pulling me up and towards the gas chamber. "We can barricade ourselves inside the chamber," he said. I gasped. "I'm not going to lock myself in there," I shouted, waves of anxiety rising in my chest. I had images of the door slamming closed and Zyklon being poured through the vents. I shuddered, but we kept running towards it, not knowing where else to go. As we got inside the crematoria, the window smashed inwards, and I saw the girl had followed us. She had completely transformed by this point. Her skin looked yellow and papery against her long, wolfish frame. Tatters of the blood-stained uniform still clung to her body. I saw no marks from where the bullets had struck her. She ran forwards at us, lashing out with a clawed hand. Bartek pushed me just in time, and I fell, the claw missing my face by a fraction of an inch. I began to crawl away, looking back as Bartek began to cry out in terror. I looked and saw him backing away from her, his hands raised, pleading. "I don't want to die, I don't want to die," he kept saying. In a blur, she leaped forward, ripping at his throat, the bloody rictus grin still plastered across her face. A torrent of blood rushed out from the gaping wound, soaking the front of his body. She opened her mouth wide and drank the spouting arterial stream, sucking at it as she held up his body with her clawed hands. When she was done, she threw it aside and looked down at me. I had begun to rise, to jump up and begin to run when she tackled me from behind. I felt a searing pain in my back as her claw connected, leaving deep gouges. I felt something sticky and warm flowing down my back, soaking into the rips in my uniform. At that moment, a dozen SS men ran in the front door and began shooting. I was on the floor after she clawed me, which turned out to be lucky as the bullets went over me. Hissing and spitting blood, I turned my head at the last moment to see the girl galloping away from me on all fours, her freakishly long arms giving her a loping stride. She jumped back through the shattered window she had come in. The SS men all ran out after her, and I found myself alone with Bartek's body. I got up and found the rest of the prisoners confined to their barracks with armed guards watching each of the groups. The guards had left the front of the camp in a hurry, and I saw the gates stood wide open. With blood pouring down my back, I began to creep through the shadows of the camp, checking the watchtowers and the front gates for people. They had all joined in the pursuit or were with the confined prisoners in their barracks, and they had apparently forgotten about a lone Sonderkommando like myself. I finally made my way outside. I didn't see a single other prisoner or guard in the front. But when I looked back, before I left for the final time, I saw the girl leaping over the razor wire fence as countless soldiers pursued her. Good for you, I said to myself. Good for you. Third story. White wolf with red eyes. I was driving home from work yesterday, late at night, around 10 p.m., when I encountered what appeared to be a white wolf with red eyes, smiling at me. I live out in the rural areas, and it is very common to see stray dogs roaming the roads and forests out near the house. But this one stood out. It was crossing the road as I drove past, and it stopped and looked at me. I only saw it for a second or two, because I kept driving, but it appeared to either be a wolf or hybrid dog/wolf, white with red eyes as her mouth opened and smiling at me. I saw a lot of sharp teeth, and at first I felt the eyes were reflected by my car lights. But as I drove past and the lights faded from the wolf/dog's eyes, they stayed red. There was something inherently creepy about this animal/being, as it sort of glowed, aka stood out from the background of reality. It sent a chill down my spine, and I was creeped out furthermore by the fact that there was mist/fog in the area. This is normal after a lot of rain, but we haven't had a lot of rain in that recently. So it was extra spooky. I did some Googling and found the being might be a sort of ghost dog seen in Celtic and British mythology. But the extra spooky part is when I got home with my dashcam in hand to show my boyfriend the footage. The dog in the video looked like it was part brown and white, like a regular dog despite being mostly blurry on top of that. Either way, the animal in the dashcam footage did not look like the wolf/dog I spotted in person. People saw wolves sometimes appear to have red eyes due to cameras and lights, but this didn't even show up a wolf on the camera. And the eyes stayed red after the lights fell off of it. It left me ultimately unnerved, especially when I had to stop the car to get the mail at a very dark street corner before the house. Fourth story. The Shepherd and the Lonely Werewolf. It took me 12 nights to figure out what the littlest werewolf wanted from me. I'd stand in the sheep pasture at twilight and glare at her as she crouched in the sagebrush, her unblinking golden eyes tracking my every step. My old sheepdog Zeus would bark and claw in the red dust, agitated and protective, yet too lazy to make chase. But the wolf never tried to steal a sheep. She never moved at all. At least, not unless I broke her gaze and looked away for a moment. Then I'd glance back, and she'd be gone, in an instant disappearing into the pinyon and juniper trees of the Hummingbird Hills, that sunless thicket where the less benevolent of the gods were rumored to lurk. I'd stand quietly and listen to her mournful howl bring down the moon, a bewailing that echoed through the canyons and vibrated the dry grass beneath my feet. Kill the white man seemed to be her lament, carried on the cool night winds. Kill him. Her words confounded me. There were certainly no white men around here. Living in a remote pueblo in the desert canyonlands of northern Arizona, the only white men I ever encountered were the occasional sheriff's deputy or government agent, well-intentioned Mormon missionaries promising a marvelous afterlife, or anthropologists fascinated by our complex pantheon. All of these visitors were politely escorted away. Even still, the presence of the little wolf bedeviled me, for I quickly understood that I was the only one who had yet seen or heard her. A real wolf? Papa, my youngest daughter Ariadne asked me one morning, as I told her and her sisters the story over breakfast. Or a creature quite like it, I said, finishing my cereal with one hand, stirring sugar into my coffee with the other. I reckon there's a breath of something primate and conscious in there. What makes you think she's not all wolf? My middle daughter Antiope asked. She crouches in the same place every day and never looks at the sheep. She watches me alone with the saddest of eyes. Her ears flick at the sound of my voice, and her own howl is unusually expressive and forlorn. But a human can't howl, my oldest daughter Arachne declared. Maybe she's a god in disguise, I said, winking at her. Or their half-human child, the daughter of a wolf god, born to a human mother who feared it so much she abandoned it in the desert to die. My wife Leah suddenly dropped her coffee mug. It shattered on the floor, and I turned in surprise. I hadn't noticed her there, standing at the stove, listening to the conversation. What do you think it is, Mama? Antiope asked her, unconcerned. Leah shrugged and took a sip of her coffee from the mug in her hands. I looked but saw no broken mug. I blinked, figuring I'd only imagined the loud smash and the fragmented splinters of earthenware. "Isn't the Fish and Wildlife Service reintroducing gray wolves around here?" she said. "They're trying to clear the overpopulation of deer at the Grand Canyon. Maybe one of those wolves wandered across." "Maybe," I agreed. "But this one speaks to me, I think, just like Annie Cassandra," Ariadne said. "She hears the wind speak to her in human words. It makes her twitch and fall down asleep, and behind her eyes she sees the faces of the gods who make the wind." "Cassandra's mind is very ill," Leah said. "Leave her alone, and leave the wolf alone. If it is a god, it's best not to meddle in whatever task it must complete. Would anyone like some coffee?" The brewers steamed and hissed. The radio buzzed and hummed the morning news and the weather reports. I had to admit, I couldn't dispute my wife's assertion, but I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't get the narrative out of my head of the little cub with a mortal mother and a divine father, a child with an uncanny inclination towards turning canine when the moon rose in the sky. It brought a little spark of thrill to the slow turn of life, the life of society's outliers, out among the barren rust-colored desert. Letting my imagination run wild, I thought of my son, somewhere far from home, being cared for by the spider god who called him her beloved. I gazed at my daughters, young and vulnerable, yet so untamed and wild. I thought of the human mother who might, at this moment, be wondering where her little half-divine wolf cub was huddling, imagining her child lost among the old trees and the voices of the night. Was she scared? Was she hungry? Was she shivering with cold in these crisp autumn evenings after the sun went down, yearning for the familiar warmth of home? I love my own children more than anything. I understood that primal, animalistic urge to protect one's defenseless offspring. My heart softened towards the staring and unmoving cub. Her origins were an enigma to me. But, were she my own daughter, I'd certainly hope another parent would be there to keep a vigilant eye on her and listen to her unspoken desires. The next evening, I began to bring small scraps of mutton and elk jerky to the wolf girl. She'd cower if I walked too close, pulling back her lips to show me her gleaming white fangs. "Kill the white man," she rasped in a voice like radio static. "First you must eat," I whispered affectionately. "Then you may kill whatever ghost you happen to find." I was often close enough to smell her, only briefly. She carried the sweet scent of burning sagebrush and tobacco in her fur. Once, I thought I saw a single tiny, glistening tear emerge from her sunken eye and roll down her snout. "Kill him," she howled from afar. "Kill what man?" I asked. "There is no white man here. Only me, and I'm the only one who knows you're here. Why won't you let me help you?" She stared, silent as ever. But she did not run from me that evening. Encouraged by her sprouting interest in being nurtured, I turned up a few old baby blankets. Within their folds, I tucked bits of fragrant lavender and soothing catnip. I left them under a pinyon tree near the border to the dense forest of the Hummingbird Hills. I'd taken care of her hunger and her shivering. All I could do now was try to heal her loneliness, to take her somewhere warm and inviting, and reunite her with the family from whom she surely must have been forced to depart. But that was not to be. On the 12th day, I was paid a visit by a deputy of the county sheriff. I was spending a lazy autumn day in the kitchen garden, checking the tall stalks of blue corn for ripeness, pulling back the husks to get a swift glimpse of their deep indigo kernels, their rare beauty as hidden and lustrous as a dragon's cache of jewels. For a moment, I imagined myself the hero of that story, slaying the dragon and stealing its bounty. He didn't see me watching him as he drove up the winding road that spiraled around the mesa on which our pueblo was perched. His clunky white pickup truck rumbled and roared across the ancient bridge of bones that connected Mercury Mesa to Jupiter Mesa, and followed the dusty red road to where I stood, a fat husk gripped too tightly in my hands. Deputy Babbitt got out of the truck and faced me, covering the gun on his hip, watching my hands, avoiding my eyes. Babbitt didn't much care for people like me. We didn't much care for deputies. "Sir," he nodded, trying to look casual in a place so backward and foreign to a white man. He swept off his sun-bleached cowboy hat and leaned against the hood of the truck, stubbing out his cigarette with his pale leather boot. "How's everything going around the farm? How's your wife and that beehive of daughters?" I looked over my shoulder to make sure my family was safe inside the house. I remembered then that Leah had taken the children along to see the traveling carnival in Kanab. Zeus was probably asleep in the sheep pasture. Mr. Beartooth, Babbitt said when I didn't answer. I've heard a rumor that you've spotted a wolf nearby. One that's stalking your sheep and eating your food. Rumor? I said. Gossip, certainly. There haven't been wolves around here for 50 years. You ought to know that. Who told you I'd seen a wolf? Cassandra Maldonado. She won't speak to me, but I heard her young daughter's gone missing, and I believe the girl may have been dragged away by the wolf your kids are telling everyone about. Poor Cassandra. Her daughter was all she'd had. But if there was anyone who craved utter solitude, it was Cassandra. She lived a hermetical life on the dusty outskirts of the pueblo, with only her cows for company, and we all assumed that's the way she wanted it. I myself had always been uneasy around her, never sure what to say or where to look when I'd bring her gifts of surplus peaches, and she'd begin to yelp and swear and convulse. But we all avoided her, back then. We told ourselves it was what she needed. I was vaguely sorry to hear her child was missing. I'd forgotten she had a child. I turned my back on the sheriff's deputy and back to my corn. I've told you all I know, I said to him, my fingers idly digging at the brittle husks, not knowing even what they were doing. I hoped you wouldn't see my hands shaking. I think it's time for you to leave, deputy. Babbitt was quiet for a long moment. Well, I have the feeling there's something else you're not telling me, he said, his voice as low and discordant as a rattlesnake's tail. I clenched my jaw. I waited. I opened and closed a corn husk again and again, entwining my fingers in the gossamer green tassel, feeling the top bulge of milk beneath the swollen kernels. I glanced at the garden shears on the opposite side of the garden, imagining the crunch they'd make as they sheared off the man's nicotine-stained fingers. There was a sound of a door opening and closing. I turned around again. Deputy Babbitt was dragging a brownish-gray bundle from the bed of his truck. His hands and his white jacket were stained with its blood. I knew right away what I was seeing. Its fur was matted and dirt-clogged. Its caved inside was stained with a rust-colored smudge. Its tongue hung out of a mangled snout, and its amber eyes stared straight ahead into my own eyes, as they always had, never breaking that line of sight. Babbitt dropped it heavily on the ground and finally stared at me forthright. Don't you ever lie to me like that again, he hissed into my face. I've just done you a favor by shooting this dangerous animal, and now I expect to be thanked, not deceived. I put my life in danger for your flock, for your wife, for your children. You don't have to like me, but you do have to respect me. That's all I ask. There are worse predators out there than this one, and you have no idea what I've done for you to let you people quarantine yourselves up here without interference. My family has lived in Arizona for a century, civilizing this barren dust bowl, trying to guide your people into the modern world, and all we get back from you is suspicion and scruple. Now don't you dare take my protection for granted and ruin it for the ones that want progress and improvement. Don't you dare violate that tenuous trust I've been generous enough to give, even as I overlook your flaws. Don't you dare. I glared, straight ahead, our faces so close I could smell the remains of his cigarette in his white mustache. I did not sever my gaze with his. I thought of the littlest werewolf, speaking through the silence, pleading with her eyes. He couldn't hold for long. He kicked the wolf's body with his white boot. So that's all you've got, he growled. No thanks, no gratitude? Does this dead menace mean nothing to you? You are nothing to me, I said. One day you, too, will lie in the sand, but you won't get a burial nearly as grand as hers. Your mouth will fill with dust and cornmeal. Your tongue will be replaced by a scorpion's tail. Your eye sockets will be the nursery for a rattlesnake's eggs. Your ribs will be made hollow by the sun and will whine in the wind like a bone flute. Is that a threat, he said, backing away, or a curse? Neither, I said. It's an expectation, an aspiration, an invocation. He gritted his teeth. Then he turned, smashed his hat back on his head, and got into his truck. I waited for him to cross the bone bridge before I turned and crouched at the side of the little wolf girl, another father's daughter, my pollen-covered fingers stroking her ears, still soft, still listening to words carried on a wind that blew from another world, the land of the dead. I lay there until the sun set. Then I carried her down the mesa and buried her at the edge of the sheep pasture, the place where I'd first seen her, waiting, quietly begging me to listen to her wolf words. I smudged her nose and forehead with all the corn pollen remaining on my hands, as one does to both the newly dead and the newly born, as I had done to all my children, and later to my father. Zeus watched for a while, sitting on his haunches, before he finally let out a low, ululating howl that echoed off the hills and resonated through the canyons and reverberated in the craters of the luminous silver moon. He led me back home, where Leah and the children had already gone to bed. In the night, I woke, feeling as if I'd heard my name whispered in a dream. I rolled over to watch the moon out the window, but the clouds had gathered, covering it in a pearlescent shroud. Hephaestus, a voice called to me into the stillness and the holy dark, a voice that sounded like Cassandra's. Hephaestus, she was pregnant, too young to be, I said, and could not contain my tears. She was only 13, too young, I said again. Too gentle to endure the... I sat straight up. Was she born human? Not a wolf. Fully human, Cassandra whispered. Deeply loved. Who transformed her? The voice was silent. I looked down at Leah, asleep next to me, untroubled by the whispers. I wondered if I had only dreamt the conversation. For immediately, it was lost in the haze of linear time, just like the coffee mug that had never shattered. Soon I, too, slept again, a restless doze that allowed my mind to walk barefoot across the desert sands, leaving no footprints, wandering under a swiftly spinning sky whose stars had no names. The following morning, I found the body of Deputy Babbitt at the far end of the sheep pasture. He had been scalped, flayed, and disemboweled, his entrails making spirals and curlicues in the dust. His throat had been torn out, left in bloody tatters of oozing, putrefying shreds of flesh. His genitals had been torn almost completely from his body, left dangling and mangled. His toenails and fingernails had been yanked out of their bleeding cuticles. His mouth, open in an eternal scream of agony, was stuffed with dried sagebrush and cactus thorns. His ribcage, splayed open to reveal a half-eaten heart and lungs, made a wailing, keening noise that swelled and receded with the icy wind. I looked at my fingertips, again dusted with corn pollen. Then I wiped my hands on my jeans and did not touch the dead man's forehead. From afar, I felt myself being watched. I turned. Watching me from the other side of the fence was an enormous wolf with green eyes that wept human tears. Its fur was black all over, like a person in mourning. It gazed at me not with fear or caution, as the young one had, but with attentive rage. "Who are you?" I asked, holding its gaze, my hand on the hunting knife at my hip. "It ought to be your wife, lying there in the dirt, rotting alongside the man," said the black wolf, in a voice like the whispers I had heard in the clouded night. "Your dispute is not with Leah," I said. "She's done nothing wrong." "Leah never asked my permission to transform my daughter," said the black wolf. "She acted hastily, and by the time I found out what happened, she could not undo what she had done. My Ida didn't have to die. She didn't have to suffer in the cold night, alone and starving, wondering why this perversion had been put upon her. "I don't understand," I said. "I love my daughter. I loved her. She was all I had. I would have loved her baby in a way that nobody in this desert ever loved me. You've all rejected and abandoned me, forced me to live far away from everyone. You hated Ida for her slow mind and slow speech. You hated me for the way I twitched and fainted. Yet still I had no desire to be a wolf. Magic in the hands of one with an unsound mind is perilous. But when the deputy came around, talking rumors about my Ida, I transformed myself anyway, to be close to my little one forever. And now it's too late. You've all killed her." The black wolf stepped closer to me. "Leah stole something from me in more ways than one. She stole it to carry out her private vengeance on the white man. But my own vengeance is not complete. Warn your wife that when I see her again, I will tear her apart, piece by piece. I will prolong her suffering for years, as I replace her human body with this wolf's body. I refuse to become human again until I've been satisfied. Then she stood on her hind legs, becoming as tall and straight-backed as the tallest human. She bolted into the overgrown woods of the Hummingbird Hills to where the sun refused to shine. I confronted Leah that night by the fireplace. "Don't keep secrets from me like that," I said softly, restraining my impatience, my indignation. "I had every right," she said. "It's not the first and won't be the last." "Why, Leah? Why did you turn Ida into a wolf? You're not a shaman or a witch. You have no right to be using magic against a child. Why would you do something so contemptible?" Leah was listening to a record of Bach violin sonatas while she drank watermelon wine straight from the bottle. Its sweet smell could not overtake the steely scent of blood that saturated the room. She set it down, hard, on the wooden floor and looked me straight in the eye. "I was protecting Ida. When Cassandra showed me the black moth encased in amber, a gift she claimed to have been given by the wolf god White Paws, she swore it would turn me into a wolf. I could finally kill Babbitt with no consequences, as I had wanted to do for so long. But I found that I couldn't. I had too much to lose. I have a home and children and a job. Instead, when I saw Ida was pregnant, I gave the piece of amber to her and changed her into a wolf. I forbade her from telling her mother, and I sent her out into the desert to hunt that lowlife scum. Protecting her? From what? You seem to have tied a knot even you cannot untangle. I told you, Ida was pregnant. Who do you think was the father of her child? And who do you think is Ida's father, too? The deputy, I said, suddenly feeling small and simple for not making the connection until now. Ida had always been more light-skinned than the rest of us, and we had mistrusted her because of it. What an abomination for a man to beget a child on his own daughter. I gave Ida a gift, Leah continued, the gift of carrying out vengeance. The only gift I could give that would match the generosity of a wolf god. I would have wanted that privilege for myself. Years ago, I was younger than she when Babbitt raped me, and my rage had a knife's edge. I raged because I was powerless, and his power is so unbounded that he killed Ida anyway, not to protect himself from the accusation, but because he could. Eventually, he would have found some other girl to victimize. And then what would we do? Turn all our girls into a colony of bats? Would you want to see your own daughters hanging upside down in a cave all day, unable to live a beautiful life in the sunshine? I admit I used magic that did not belong to me, and which I had no right to try to control. But you need to understand that I only intended to protect the girl. I told Ida she must be the one to slay Babbitt, to force him to look into her eyes in the moment of his death, to regret his actions, to understand that the consequences were finally catching up with him. And once he was dead, I promised Ida I would find a way to make her human again. She never had the heart to kill him, I said. Too gentle a soul, abused until she had no will of her own. Too meek to stain her teeth with blood. Her blood is on your hands. Hephaestus, Leah said, again changing the subject. What about your role? Ida was begging you to kill the deputy. The white man. The white man in the white truck with the white hat and the white boots. Why didn't you do it? Once you saw that she had failed to take him down. He was here the day she was shot. You didn't tell me, but I could smell his scent all over the ground when I arrived home. Nobody would have seen you cut his throat. Nobody would have known. The gods would have devoured the body and protected you from the consequences, had you asked. Why didn't you avenge me? Avenge Ida. Avenge all his past and future victims. Why didn't you listen to her cries? You overlooked her human desires and ignored what she was saying with her human voice. You treated her like some spoiled household dog who only wants a bed and a belly rub. Don't lay the burden of shame on me, I said. You misled me. You told me she was an ordinary wolf and to leave her alone. How could I have known Ida would fail? Clearly, I'm not as clever or powerful as you think me to be. Leah scowled. A child is dead, she said, and all you care about is shifting the blame to anyone but yourself. You sound an awful lot like Babbitt right now. You're wrong, I fumed. I have been humbled, Leah, and I believe you are the merciless one. You used magic stolen from a vulnerable mother and left a little girl in a body she didn't want. You forced a child to fight your battle, and now Cassandra will be forever stalking you. She has her canine stare fixed on you, on your every move. One day, she'll pounce and take her revenge on you, and she will tear you apart piece by piece, year after year, and replace your body with a wolf's. And I will never be powerful enough to protect you. I can't. The blanket around her shoulders fell. She quickly pulled it back up, but not before I saw a flash of the gray-brown of a wolf's furry foreleg, hastily stitched onto the bleeding stump of her elbow with greasy sinew. I looked up from the fresh wound. I met her eyes. She glared back at me, eyes fiery, but I could not hold her gaze. I bent my head, and I hid my face in my hands. Fifth story. I'm an American werewolf hunter. My name is Boston Murphy, and I kill werewolves for the U.S. government. I didn't join the army to get medals or to have a statue in my honor. I joined it to simply get away from my family. My father is okay, but his new wife's the most evil person you could have the misfortune of meeting. She used to constantly berate me, calling me less than dirt and a waste of space. I tried telling Dad, but he didn't believe it, or chose not to believe it. I joined the army when I was 17. It was the only way of getting away from the verbal abuse. Stepmom couldn't be happier that I was finally out of her house, but Dad was crushed. He understood why I chose to do it, but he still felt like it was his fault. It was shipping out day, and he gave me an emotional send-off. It was time to start my own life. I arrived to Fort Bronson by Thursday. I still remember having goosebumps arriving. This was it. I was really doing this. No turning back now. Fort Bronson was a massive base, expanding over 60 acres. The bus stopped, and drill instructor Haymeyer walked on board, gracing us with his hospitality. Attention you piss cans. I'm Instructor Haymeyer. I'll be your friend for the next 18 weeks. Now get your sorry asses off my bus and get checked in. Do I make myself clear? Sir, yes, sir. We all shouted in unison. We got our bags and got off the bus. Since I was sitting in the very back, I was the last one to leave. Haymeyer looked at me and stopped me. What's your name, cadet? He asked. B. Boston Murphy, sir. I replied nervous. He looked me up and down, muttering to himself. You're not going with them. You're going to special assignment ward. Haymeyer said. I haven't been here more than 10 minutes, and I'm already getting a special assignment. Where is that, sir? I asked. In the room next to the mess hall in the north building. Now get the hell off my bus. Haymeyer replied. I quickly got my bags and left. The north building was the farthest building on base, away from everyone else. The sun was furious that day. I was sweating hard, yet I walked at a brisk pace. All I know, it could be the first test. I entered the building. The air conditioning inside greeted me like an old friend. The place was a maze of stairs and hallways. I had to use my map. The mess hall was located on the second hallway. I climbed the stairs, carrying my luggage with me. This building seemed less maintained than the other buildings, but who am I to judge? As I approached the mess hall, I turned to the door to the left. It looked like a janitor's closet. It had a faded special assignments sticker on the door. I opened it. A rush of old, musty air ambushed my nose. Once inside, I walked down a long hallway. There was no paint on the walls. It was gray. The fluorescent lights shined bitterly. Through a pair of double doors, I entered a waiting room. The place was empty. Only a receptionist and another cadet populated the place. I went to the receptionist. Name, please, she said. Boston Murphy. I replied. She checked her notes, sighing. I don't see you in my notes. You must be new. Why, yeah. Instructor Haymeyer sent me here. I said, sweating. She dialed a number on her phone, motioning me to take a seat. I did what she asked. The other cadet in the room was a skinhead called James. You new here too, huh? He asked. Yeah, man. I replied. Me too. I was so ready to kick some jihadi ass, but I'm here instead. You feel me? He asked. Yeah, I lied. The truth was that I didn't join to kill. I was hoping to be a medic or something. My name's James. What's yours? He asked. Boston. I replied. You seem cool, Boston. Personally, I hope this was a mistake. I want to hit the range and make those bastards pay for 9/11. James said. Cadet James Fillmore. The receptionist said. I guess that's my K. See you, brother. James said, patting my back. I waited to be called in, watching videos on my phone. The receptionist on the phone looked at me every so often, whispering. After what seemed like centuries, I was finally called up. The receptionist told me to go through the double doors and into the first door on the right. I walked through, luggage in hand. The hallway I walked in was small and dark. The door on the right said, Lycanthropy Extermination with Greg Romero. Lycanthropy? Like in Werewolves? This had to be a joke. Surely Haymeyer played a prank on me, testing how gullible new recruits are. I looked further down the hall. It only got weirder from there. Wendigo Extermination with Susan Fletcher. Thunderbird Extermination with Otto Haymeyer. Zombie Extermination with Tony Stevenson. I had half a mind to walk out and confront Haymeyer, but something told me that he didn't appreciate being called a liar. Despite my doubts, I walked in. Inside it looked like a regular classroom, having desks and such. James was sitting in the back while I sat near the front. "Hey Boston, small world. Am I right?" he asked. "I suppose," I replied. I sat down, and a man started speaking. "Welcome, cadets. I'm Greg Romero. And for the next 18 weeks, I'll teach you how to dispatch a Lycanroc." Mr. Romero said. James raised his hand. "Aren't werewolves fake, though?" he asked. "I wish they were fake, but no, they're not. Lycanrocs pose a serious threat to livestock and humanity as a whole." Mr. Romero replied. I raised my hand. "Where's the rest of the class?" I asked. Romero sighed. "We're not as popular as Wendigo Extermination, but hopefully we'll receive more recruits next year." Romero showed a photo of a mutilated woman being eaten by a werewolf. I gagged. "We have a thankless job, gentlemen. Only 2 people know we exist, and that's the 2 of you. Who wants to kill a wolf?" Romero asked. We both shouted in unison. For the next 18 weeks, I was taught how to kill a wolf. Silver does kill one, but instead of a crossbow, I got a Mini 14 with silver bullets. I was trained how to track wolves and how to survive in the wild. It was hard at first, but I got the hang of it. On graduation day, I was so happy James and I got drunk at his place. At first I didn't like James, but during training we became friends. I was deployed to Arizona of all places. The assignment was simple. An elderly Lycanroc was spotted in the area, and I had to dispatch him. I had to cut off its right hand as proof and return it to my bosses. I was getting paid $100,000 for this. Since I was new, this assignment was sort of a test to see if I have what it takes. I arrived at Ground Zero, a campsite. The brass in Washington were nice enough to close its surrounding area so nobody could get hurt. I looked for clues, only to find a patch of hair. It smelled like piss, meaning that a wolf was nearby. The hair led deep into the brush, into the desert. The sun was angry that day. It cooked my skin under all my armor. It led to an abandoned farmhouse, but any sign of a farm was dried up a long time ago. I crept to a window, rifle in hand. I peeked, and not only did I see the wolf, but there was also 2 little wolves seemingly surrounding him. "Come on, Grandpa, let's go play," one of the little ones said, nibbling on the big one's ear. "In a while, kids, I have to rest," he replied. My hands were shaking, sweat dripped from my brow. I had to do this, I was getting paid to. I took a deep breath, then I kicked down the door. I opened fired, shooting the big one in the chest 4 times, sending him backwards. The kids looked on in horror, screaming and crying. I brought out my axe and hacked off his right hand. I placed it in my bag, the puppy's still crying. "Shut your fucking mouths," I yelled, pointing my rifle at them. They only screamed louder. I panicked. I didn't want to fail my first mission. I did what I had to. I shot the puppies, hitting them both in the head. I hacked off their right hands, putting them in my bag. Once the adrenaline died, I threw up. What's done is done. I can't fix it. I had $300,000 in my bag, softening the blow. I returned to my boss and gave them the hands. They were surprised to say the least. "Damn, not only did you take out that old fuck, but you popped his grandkids too. You're the best exterminator we ever had. No mercy. I'm gonna call you Eisner from now on?" "Okay," my boss said, signing me a check. It was from the United States Treasury, $300,000. I placed the money in my bank account when I got home. Before I left, my boss said, "Your new assignment is to dispatch wolf pups spotted in Alaska, but I don't think that would be a problem for you, Eisner." He winked. It made me sick. I reloaded my silver ammo, bought some beef jerky, and flew to Alaska. A logger found a wolf pup hanging out around the woods near his house and locked it in his shed. I told him to stay back, in case it got aggressive. I went in, closing the door behind me. Huddled in the corner, I saw 4 wolf pups. They looked scared. I wasn't proud of what happened next. I fired and I took their hands. I returned to my boss and turned in the hands. He gave me $400,000 this time. Eisenherv, you're making your country safer every time you go out. You're a hero, son, he said. I don't feel like a hero, sir. I replied. Just know this, they're monsters. They don't know right from wrong. All they know is killing. Take 2 months off, then come back, okay? He said, sending me off. I still don't feel like a hero. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comment section and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.